My question is, as a redeemed progressive, what is the key to empowering men in the Me Too age while maintaining healthy boundaries and strong behavioural expectations?
Especially young white men, that they're walking around feeling like they've done something when they've done nothing. What a recipe for a disaster and the type of totalitarian society that we've been talking about up here.
You see the same thing in criminal behavior. Hardly anyone is a criminal.
Yeah.
Then if you take the fraction of people who are criminals, most of them are like 1-2-time criminals, right?
Yep.
But there's a professional hardcore group that commit all the crimes.
Yeah.
Well, it's the same thing with sexual assault and sexual harassment. Well, you don't want to confuse the action of some of the men with all of the men. Like, it's really important to get that distinction right, and we're not getting that distinction right.
The Me Too movement, which focuses on the experiences of sexual violence survivors, has earned a large response in part because sexual harassment and sexual assault impact people every day. By sharing their own experiences, the movement's proponents make clear just how common sexual harassment is. The hope is that if people are more aware of sexual harassment and how casually it is sometimes treated, then tolerance for it will decrease and support for victims will rise. During the early years, Tarana Burke, an American social activist, began to use the phrase Me Too on the social networking platform MySpace to highlight the occurrence of sexual harassment, particularly as it targeted women of color. Burke argues that the Me Too movement works on empowerment through empathy by showing the world just how common sexual harassment is and by telling survivors that they aren't alone and are supported.
So we had a couple of decades of experimentation. It's like, well, how'd that go? Little hard on the family, I would say. That's not so good for kids. AIDS, that wasn't a plus. Could have killed us all. And it mutated, particularly to take advantage of promiscuous sex, because viruses are very tricky things. So it turns out that sex is a little bit more complicated than we thought. Well, it actually turns out that it's a lot more complicated than we think. Okay, and now it's 50, 60 years later, and we're trying to sort this out. It's like, well, when is it okay to have sex? Exactly. And when is it not okay to have sex? And what does it mean that it's okay? And what does consent mean? And the answer to that is, well, we never used to have to think these things through because the rule was don't have sex until you get married. Feminism, I mean, the idea that it would be a good thing for the world to arrange itself so that the talents of women were as available to use by the collective, let's say, by the group or by society as the talents of men, then obviously that's all for the good. I don't have any problem with that whatsoever, because talent's in short supply and it's a foolish society that wastes it no matter where it manifests itself. Racial divisions or ethnic divisions or any of that, equality of opportunity, I can't see how you can be a sensible person and not
Do you think do women have opportunity? Do women have equality of opportunity then broadly across Western societies?
Compared to what?
Okay. Compared to not having equality of opportunity?
Well, compared to 100 years ago, yes. Compared to 50 years ago, yes. Compared to most places in the world throughout history, yes. Compared to a hypothetical ideal, no. But I'm very, very leery. Would that
hypothetical ideal be a good ideal or a bad ideal?
Well, it depends on how you define equality. If you define it as equality of outcome, then it's a catastrophic idea. Well, we're not having a conversation about the rule. We're waiting till someone does something that seems like it might be untoward and then mobbing them and trying to extract the rule out that way. And it's not a very effective way of doing it. You know, you want to decrease campus rape? That's easy. Get rid of alcohol. No one has that conversation. It's like I did my PhD work on alcohol. 50% of the people who are murdered are drunk, and 50% of the people who kill them are drunk. And almost all the date rape situations are consequences of excess intoxication. But yet there's a party culture on campuses and anything goes. And you also have this strange thing, especially on the radical left, which is unbelievably paradoxical, where absolutely every form of sexual expression imaginable is 100% permissible because sex is fine, but it's so dangerous that while you're dancing with someone at a Princeton mixer, You have to ask them 2 or 3 times if it's okay for you to continue. Law schools believe that Western law is a patriarchal and oppressive tradition, and that undermining it and destroying it by doing things like removing due process and insisting on preponderance of evidence and going for consequence rather than intent, that's fine, because all they're doing is tearing down a terrible tyrannical patriarchal structure. Having never had the fortune to spend any time in an Iranian prison, for example, they're not very good at distinguishing between what constitutes a tyranny and what constitutes a free society.
Until we figure all this stuff out, assuming we will at some point, the sexual stuff I'm talking about, can ordinary men and ordinary women continue to work together?
A lot of it's emergent self-protection. You know, men say, don't ever have a meeting with a woman when the door's closed.
Yeah.
In fact, I've been told that at the university.
Yeah.
Never have a meeting with a student with the door closed. It's like, I ignore that because there's no damn way I'm doing that. But that's common practice. I don't know the answer to whether or not men and women can work together en masse, because it's not under the current conditions. We don't have the rules right. You only really get to try out about 5 people in your life. You have to make a decision pretty damn quick. You know, like between 20 and 30, there's a lot of things to get straight, and long-term mate is usually one of them. And most of the time, people should be more careful with their sexual behavior when they're young, especially when they're drunk, than they are. And I just think it's so interesting that all of the taboo reconstruction is coming from the radical left. It's not what you'd expect at all. You'd think it'd be the damn right-wing Christians complaining about, sexual immorality. It's like, no, it's the radical lefties. You have to have signed consent before making any physical move. And then that's so what? Really? Who thought that up? That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. You know how awkward that would be? You're supposed to be able to do a little bit of non-verbal reading.
So do you want to, so shall we just take that as a question? Do you want to engage that question on 2 types of brain, and then we can be a bit clearer
Well,
on
there
the
aren't
question?
2 types of brain, and men and women are more the same by personality than they are different by a substantial margin. There's more similarity than difference.
If there's more similarity than difference.
But that doesn't mean the differences are irrelevant. So let me give you an example. Right. So if you pick 2 people at random out of the population and had to guess who was more aggressive, and you guessed the man, you'd be right 60% of the time. That's about the magnitude of the difference between men and women.
Well, that's 60-40. It's not that much of a
That's
margin,
right.
is it?
That's exactly right. But, and this is where things get more sophisticated. All right, so then imagine that you had to pick the 1 in 100 most aggressive person and put them in jail, which is what we do. They're all men. So even though at the midpoint, the difference between men and women isn't that extreme, at the extremes, the difference is extraordinary. And most of the activity, or much of the activity in complex situations, happens at the extremes. One of the things I often tell my young clients is, don't do anything physically with anyone that you wouldn't talk to them about. Because if you're too damn embarrassed to talk about it, well, maybe it's a little premature in the relationship to actually do it. And then there's harm in it. There's emotional harm in it on both parties. There's the cheapening of both parties. So it's going to take us a long time to sort this out. But hopefully we can do it in a serious manner, and it won't be merely a matter of mobbing those who seem to have made an error.